My mother waited until my wedding photographer had lined up the family for our first official portrait before she touched my arm and said, "Erica, move over. Claire needs the center." I laughed, not because it was funny, because after 38 years of being Diane Morgan's daughter, laughter had become one of my emergency responses. Smile first, figure out later whether I'd just been insulted. Mom didn't smile back. "I'm serious," she said. "Just for a few minutes." I was standing beneath an arch of white roses and eucalyptus in a wedding dress I had spent 7 months choosing. My husband, Mark, was 3 feet away talking to his uncle. 200 people were still finishing dessert behind us. And my mother was asking the bride to move out of the center of her own wedding photograph. "For what?" I asked. She looked toward the stage. That was when I saw my twin sister Claire standing beside the projection screen. The screen had displayed Erica and Mark all evening. Now it was changing. Our names disappeared. A graduation portrait filled the space instead. Claire, in a navy cap and gown. Below it, in gold letters, "Congratulations, Claire Morgan, Master of Public Administration." For a second, I thought the venue had opened the wrong file. Then I noticed the podium, the extra microphone, the little stack of printed cards on the table beside my father, and I understood something had been planned without me. My mother reached for my bouquet. "Give me that. You can hold it again after." I pulled it back. "What exactly is happening?" She gave me the look she had used since we were teenagers whenever I asked a question she believed should have been answered by obedience. "Don't start, Erica." Behind us, someone tapped a spoon against a champagne glass. Conversations softened. My mother walked toward the microphone. Claire looked at me once. Her face was tight. She mouthed, I didn't know. I didn't know whether I believed her." My mother smiled at my wedding guests. "Before we continue with Erica and Mark's reception, our family has another wonderful milestone to celebrate." A few people clapped automatically. I stayed where I was. My daughter Claire completed her Master of Public Administration this spring. More applause. Mom stretched out one hand. "Come up here, sweetheart." Claire hesitated. Then she went. That hurt almost as much as what came next. Not because she had earned a master's degree at 38. Claire had worked for it. Night classes, weekend assignments, years of juggling donor events with coursework. I had congratulated her. I had bought her graduation dinner. The problem wasn't her degree. The problem was that my mother had spent years treating that degree like a coronation. Claire handled community outreach for Morgan Literacy Initiative, the nonprofit my mother had founded almost a decade earlier. She was good in rooms. She remembered donors' spouses, children, favorite wines. She could speak for 20 minutes without notes and somehow make everyone feel as though she had spoken directly to them. My mother loved that. I was the opposite. I was a senior grant compliance manager. I liked deadlines that stayed where you put them. I liked documents that meant the same thing on Monday as they had on Friday. I liked knowing who was responsible for what before somebody discovered a problem. At work, those qualities had built my career. In my family, they had turned me into free infrastructure. Mom lifted her champagne glass. This degree is the final piece Claire needed for the next chapter of our foundation. There it was. Not a graduation toast. A succession announcement. At my wedding, my father rose from his chair with his glass already in his hand. We always knew one of our girls would carry on the family mission. One of our girls. I felt Mark come to stand beside me. Dad smiled at Claire. She earned this. We couldn't be prouder. Then his eyes moved to me. And of course Erica has something to celebrate too. A few guests laughed uncertainly. My mother joined in. Yes. Erica got a beautiful wedding. I waited. There should have been another sentence. There wasn't. Dad chuckled. Well, Claire earned a master's degree. Erica got a dress and a party. A woman at the table nearest me stopped with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh my God." I felt heat crawl up my neck. Mom heard it too. Instead of stopping, she smiled wider. Both girls have their strengths. Then she looked directly at me. But some achievements take more than a dress. There are insults that hurt because they surprise you. That one hurt because it didn't. It fit too neatly into 38 years of family arithmetic. When Claire and I graduated high school, I worked weekends and paid half my first semester's expenses myself. Claire made valedictorian. My parents threw her a dinner. When I received my first promotion, Mom said, "That's wonderful. Can you look at this grant budget for me?" When Claire was accepted into her master's program, my father posted 3 photographs online. When I became senior manager, Mom called me that evening because the foundation's quarterly report wasn't balancing. Claire got announcements. I got assignments. And somehow I had spent years telling myself that being the one they relied on meant I mattered just as much. My mother pointed toward the stage. "Erica, honey, step aside so we can get a picture of Claire with us. At my wedding. Under my flowers. With my photographer." I stared at her. "What?" "It will take 1 minute." "Mom, this is my wedding." Her expression hardened. "And Claire has worked for years for this degree." "I know." I celebrated her graduation. "Then don't make this ugly." That sentence landed harder than the others. She had taken over my reception, moved me out of my own photographs, compared my marriage to my sister's degree. And somehow, I was the one in danger of making things ugly. I said quietly, "Stop the presentation." Mom stepped closer so the microphone wouldn't catch her voice. "For once in your life, let your sister have something without making it about you." I almost laughed again. Instead, I looked at Claire. She was still standing on stage. She wasn't smiling anymore. But she wasn't stepping down either. Then Mark leaned toward me. His voice was low enough that only I could hear it. "Do you want me to stop this?" That mattered. He didn't say, "I'm stopping this." He didn't decide what kind of daughter I should be. He asked. I looked at my mother holding the microphone. My father arranging himself beside Claire for photographs. The projection screen that should have had my husband's name beside mine. And something in me became very still. Yes. Mark took out his phone. 1 call. That was all. He called Jenna, our wedding coordinator, who was standing near the sound booth. "Erica did not approve this segment," he said. "She wants the contracted program resumed now." Jenna looked directly at me from across the room. I nodded. Seconds later, Claire's graduation portrait disappeared. The screen went black. My father looked around. The microphone went silent. Mom tapped it once. Then twice. Nothing. Jenna crossed the room carrying the thick black event binder she had been using all day. "Mrs. Morgan," she said politely, "we need to return to the approved reception schedule." Mom stared at her. "I arranged this weeks ago." "Yes, ma'am. But program changes require approval from the couple. This segment wasn't included in their signed event plan." My mother's face changed. Not dramatically. She was too controlled for that. But I saw the color leave the tops of her cheeks. Dad stepped forward. "We paid for this addition." Jenna nodded. "The additional presentation package was billed to the person who requested it. That doesn't override the couple's program approval." My father looked at me as if I had personally unplugged the building. Claire finally stepped away from the podium. The DJ, bless him, understood the assignment without being told twice. Music came back on. My name returned to the screen beside Mark's. People began talking again, louder than before. The way crowds do when everyone is pretending something humiliating did not just happen in front of them. Mark touched the back of my hand. "Do you want to leave?" I looked around the room. My friends. My co-workers. His family. The cake we hadn't cut yet. The dance floor I had imagined for months. "No." I surprised myself with how steady I sounded. "They don't get the rest of it too." So we stayed. We cut the cake. We danced. I smiled in photographs. I let Mark spin me badly enough that I nearly stepped on his shoe. And for the next 90 minutes, I refused to surrender anything else. But when the last guests began leaving, my mother found me in the service corridor behind the ballroom. Dad was with her. Claire followed several steps behind. Mark stayed beside me. Mom didn't ask whether I was okay. She didn't say she had misjudged things. Her first words were, "You humiliated your sister." I stared at her. My sister? Everyone saw that screen shut off. Yes. You couldn't let her have 12 minutes? There were 212-minute periods available this month. Why did she need mine? Duh, Sihil. There you go again. Again what? Keeping score. That almost made me smile. I worked in compliance. Of course I kept score. Most disasters started because someone decided the details didn't matter until the bill arrived. Mom folded her arms. You know what Claire's degree means for the foundation. No. I know what you think it means. It means credibility. It means leadership. It means we finally have someone properly prepared to take us into the next phase. The words came out before I could stop them. And what have I been doing for 9 years? Silence. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But long enough. Dad looked away first. Mom recovered. You help with paperwork. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Paperwork. Don't twist my words. You just called 9 years of grant reporting and compliance support paperwork. You know what I mean. I did. That was the problem. Claire stepped closer. I really didn't know she planned a whole presentation. Mom snapped her head toward her. Claire, you have nothing to apologize for. I didn't say I did. You earned that moment. Claire's eyes went to me. I thought it was just going to be a toast. I could not tell whether that made things better. Maybe she hadn't known about the 12-minute presentation. But she had still walked onto the stage. She had still stayed there while my father laughed about my dress. And I was too tired to sort innocence from convenience in a service hallway while wearing a wedding gown. I'm not doing this tonight, I said. Mom's mouth tightened. Fine, we'll talk after the weekend. The CLP report is due soon anyway, so we'll need to sit down. I actually thought I had misheard her. What? The Commonwealth Literacy Continuation Report. I know what CLP is. Then you know we don't have time for drama. There it was. My wedding was drama. Her grant deadline was reality. She reached for my forearm. I stepped back before she could touch me. A tiny movement. Barely anything. But her hand stopped in midair. The people who are strongest give the most, Erica, she said. She had said versions of that my entire life. When Claire needed help with college applications, when Dad had surgery, when the foundation opened, when a budget went sideways, when a report was due, I was the strong one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need help. It had sounded like praise for years. Standing there in my wedding dress, I heard the rest of the sentence for the first time. The people who are strongest give the most, and therefore, they are allowed to receive the least. I'm going home, I said. Mom shook her head. You're impossible when you get emotional, I almost answered. Instead, I took Mark's hand and walked away. At the venue exit, Jenna caught up with us. Erica? I turned. She held the black event binder against her chest. I thought you might want a copy of the add-on request. Why? Because you asked earlier who approved it. She pulled out a single page. I read the top. Client requested program edition. Requested by Diane Morgan. Date: 3 weeks earlier. Duration: dues minutes. Services: custom graduation slideshow. Podium microphone. Recognition cue. Family photography reset. 3 weeks. My mother had known for 3 weeks that she intended to take 12 minutes out of my wedding reception, move me aside, and turn my photographer toward Claire. It wasn't an impulsive toast. It wasn't Mom getting carried away. It had been on a schedule. Mark read over my shoulder. Do you want to keep that? Yes. What are you going to do with it? I don't know. That was true. I folded the copy carefully. Not because I was planning revenge. Because I knew my family. In 3 days, Mom would call it a misunderstanding. In 3 weeks, Dad would remember it as a short toast. In 3 months, Claire might honestly believe I had overreacted to 5 harmless minutes. And if I didn't keep the paper, there was a part of me trained from childhood that might eventually agree with them. So I put it in my bag. For once, I wanted a record stronger than guilt. 2 days later, Mark and I were home. We had postponed our honeymoon until the fall because of our work schedules, so our first married Monday looked surprisingly ordinary. Coffee, unopened wedding gifts, 3 laundry baskets, my shoes kicked under the kitchen chair. At 9:14, my laptop chimed. I nearly ignored it. Then I saw the subject line: Commonwealth Literacy Partnership Continuation Report Reminder. My stomach tightened. I opened it. 9 days remaining. Morgan Literacy Initiative received a $380,000 annual continuation grant through CLP. I had helped build the reporting process years earlier, back when Mom's little literacy project was 3 folding tables, donated books, and a checking account. Over time, helping had turned into an actual operational role no one ever bothered to name. I had my own reporting user account because CLP used individual logins with multi-factor authentication. My account. My phone. My submission. I logged into the portal. The continuation package was sitting in my queue. Status. Draft. Not submitted. I exhaled. At least nobody had submitted anything under my name. I clicked into the workflow. Budget attachment uploaded. Program narrative uploaded. Performance data uploaded. Several sections still marked pending review. Then I saw the internal responsibility note. Final compliance review. Portal submission. Erica Morgan. Underneath it, someone had typed, "Erica will handle it, like always." I sat completely still. Mark came into the kitchen carrying 2 mugs. "What happened?" I turned the laptop toward him. He read the screen. His eyes stopped on the last 4 words. "Did you agree to do this?" "No." "When was the last time anyone asked?" I thought about it. Not reminded me. Not forwarded me a deadline. Not said we need this. Actually asked. I don't remember. That frightened me more than the wedding. At my reception, my mother had publicly explained why Claire was the daughter worth being proud of. Claire had the degree. Claire had the visibility. Claire was the final piece of the foundation's future. But 9 days before $380,000 in continuation funding needed to move through review, the future apparently still depended on me. Not Claire. Not Mom. Me. My finger hovered over the button at the bottom of the page. Submit. For 9 years, I would have clicked it. I would have told myself the children served by the program weren't responsible for my family. I would have stayed up late, checked every attachment, fixed whatever was wrong, and let Mom announce Claire as the future while I made sure that future's funding arrived on time. Instead, I closed the portal. "I'm not submitting anything," I said. Mark watched me carefully. "Ever?" "No." I shook my head. "Not unless somebody can tell me, in writing, what my role is, what authority I actually have, and why my name is still sitting underneath work nobody asked me to accept." I expected relief. What I felt was guilt. Immediate. Heavy. Familiar. But underneath it was something else. A thin line of anger so clean it almost felt like clarity. My mother had spent my wedding telling everyone Claire was the future. 9 days later, their future was still waiting for me to press submit. This time, I wasn't going to do it just because they assumed I would. The next morning, the guilt was still there. It had simply learned to wear work clothes. By 8:15, I was sitting at the small desk in our upstairs office, with a mug of coffee cooling beside my keyboard. Mark had already left for work. The house smelled faintly of the lilies someone had sent after the wedding, their petals beginning to curl at the edges. On my screen, the Commonwealth Literacy Partnership portal still showed the continuation report as unfinished. 8 days remaining. I didn't open it. Instead, I opened a blank email. For nearly 10 minutes, the cursor blinked beneath Diane Morgan's name. Calling my mother would have been easier. She would have sighed first, then she would have reminded me that the literacy program served real children. After that would come some version of Claire being overwhelmed with her new responsibilities, Dad being stressed, and me being the only person who knew how the reporting process worked. By the end of the call, I would probably have been apologizing. Email had one advantage. It stayed where you put it. I typed slowly. Before I complete or submit anything related to the current CLP continuation report, I need written clarification of my role, authority, and responsibility for this reporting cycle. Then, I added that I had not agreed to serve as the reporting user for the current cycle and had not yet reviewed the full package. I read it twice. My thumb hovered over the trackpad. A familiar voice in my head supplied all the reasons not to send it. Mom had built that program from nothing. The staff depended on the grant. The children had nothing to do with the wedding. Claire had just finished graduate school. Why turn a hurt feeling into an organizational problem? That was the question I had been trained to ask. Never. Why had an organization receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars been allowed to depend on unpaid work no one had formally assigned? I added one more sentence. If Morgan Literacy Initiative would prefer to designate another reporting user, I'm happy to provide a transition checklist so the change can be made before the deadline. Then I sent it. My hands were shaking. Not dramatically. Just enough that when I picked up my coffee, the spoon rattled against the mug. For 9 years, the work had rarely started with anything official. It had started with a kitchen table. Mom had founded Morgan Literacy Initiative when Claire and I were 29. Back then, the foundation, as she liked to call it, even before it was large enough to deserve the word, operated from a borrowed room behind a community center. Mom had energy in quantities I had never understood. She could walk into a room with 6 folding chairs and convince everyone they were building something historic. I was already working in grant administration at the time. One Sunday afternoon, she brought a laptop to my apartment. "Can you just clean this up?" she asked. On the screen was a reporting template. The numbers were inconsistent. Several dates didn't match the award letter. A narrative section referred to a program year that had already ended. "How long do you have?" "Tomorrow." Of course. I fixed it. 3 hours later, Mom kissed my forehead and said, "You saved me." I remember how good those words felt. Not "thank you." Not "I should have planned better." You saved me. There was a kind of intimacy in being necessary. That first report became a calendar. The calendar became quarterly reminders, then budget checks, then attachments, then audit preparation. When CLP eventually moved to individual portal accounts, I created one because Mom hated those systems, and Claire said she was better with people than forms. Nobody sat down and decided that Erica Morgan would spend the next 9 years keeping the reporting machinery running. It happened one favor at a time. That was what made it so difficult to see. A trap built all at once has walls. A trap built from favors looks like love. My inbox chimed. Mom had answered. "You've always handled CLP. Please don't turn a family matter into a governance crisis because you're still upset about the wedding." I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. She had managed to place the grant, my professional responsibility, and my wedding humiliation into one line and make all 3 my emotional problem. I did not respond. That was new too. Normally, I would have written 3 paragraphs explaining that I wasn't angry, that I respected the mission, that this was only about clarity. Instead, I saved her email in a folder labeled CLP, Current Cycle. At work, I would never argue with a bad process when I could document it. Apparently, it had taken me almost 4 decades to realize the same rule could apply to my mother. The problem was that once I started looking at the record instead of the story we told about it, the old scenes changed shape. One year, I had used 2 days of vacation because a year-end report was missing supporting documentation. I spent most of that Tuesday at my dining room table correcting a budget narrative, while Claire took donors on a tour of the new reading center. That evening, Mom posted photographs online. Claire in a navy blazer, smiling beside shelves of donated books. The caption read, "So proud of the next generation, carrying our mission forward." I had liked the post. Then I had gone back to checking expenditure categories. Another year, I finished an impact report close to midnight on a Sunday. The next morning, Mom sent a message to our group chat thanking Claire for representing us so beautifully at a luncheon. Nothing about the report. At the time, that omission hadn't felt like evidence of anything. Claire had attended the luncheon. I had done paperwork. Those were simply our roles, except one role earned photographs. The other earned more work. The clearest moment had come 3 years earlier. My employer had offered me a 6-month cross-functional leadership rotation. It would have meant working with finance, legal, and program operations across several regions. My director told me it was the kind of assignment that could move me toward senior leadership. I had been excited enough to print the email. Then Mom called. "Your timing is terrible," she said when I told her. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. The foundation was heading into its annual reporting cycle. A program officer had requested additional outcome data. Mom said the staff were already overloaded. "We can't do year-end without you." 6 words. That was all it took. I turned down the rotation. I told my director the timing wasn't right. 2 weeks later, Mom paid for Claire to attend a nonprofit leadership conference in Chicago. At dinner afterward, Claire showed me photographs from a reception overlooking the river. Mom says this stuff is important if I'm going to move up eventually. I remember nodding. I even meant it when I said, "That's great." Sitting at my desk 3 years later, I finally let myself finish the thought I had avoided then. Her future had been treated like something worth investing in. Mine had been treated like something sturdy enough to postpone. The realization made me uncomfortable, because it would have been easy to blame Diane for everything. She had pressured me. Yes, she had benefited from my choices. Absolutely. But I had still made those choices. No one forged my rejection email to the leadership program. No one physically kept me from saying yes. I had said no because the foundation needed me. And every time I did that, I taught everyone around me the same lesson. Erica will make room. By noon, another email appeared. This one included Teresa Bell, chair of the foundation's board. I knew Teresa professionally, only in the loose sense that I had seen her at events and on reporting threads. She was a former university administrator in her early 60s, the sort of person who asked for agendas before meetings and actually read them. Mom had copied her after my email. Her message was brief. Erica has become concerned about how her volunteer support is being described. I'm confident we can resolve this internally without affecting the continuation report. Volunteer support. I stared at those 2 words. Then Teresa replied, "Regardless of how the role is characterized, we need a clear owner for the report by tomorrow afternoon. Erica, please confirm whether you intend to complete the review and submission. Diane. If not, we should begin the reporting user reassignment process immediately. No accusation. No side-taking. Just a deadline and a responsibility." I appreciated it more than I expected. For once, someone had reduced the issue to what it actually was. Who owns the work? My reply took less than a minute. I will not complete or submit the current report under an informal role. I can provide a transition checklist today. Send. There was no rush of triumph. Only a small, hollow feeling under my ribs. Because once the sentence existed in writing, I could not pretend this was still business as usual. That afternoon I built the checklist. File locations. Current attachments. Outstanding program data. Items I had not reviewed. Portal steps required for reassignment. Nothing dramatic. No sabotage. No missing password game. The account used my personal multi-factor authentication, so the organization would need CLP to designate another user. That was an administrative inconvenience, not an apocalypse. What bothered me was how easy the handoff was to describe. For years, I had been told that only I could handle these things. On paper, replacing me required a form, a new user, a few days, and somebody willing to do the work. The irreplaceable part had never been my technical ability. It had been my willingness to do it without making anyone formalize what they were asking. Around 4, I called Aunt Susan. She had been the nonprofit's treasurer for several years and was one of the few relatives who did not treat every disagreement as a referendum on family loyalty. "I need to ask you something specific," I said. "Specific is good. Do you remember whether anyone ever raised the issue of formalizing my reporting role?" She was quiet for a moment. "I remember a discussion. Board minutes? I'm not sending you board materials. I didn't ask you to." Another pause. "Search your own email from around 2021, she said. There was a thread about reporting roles. Teresa asked a question. You were copied because you built the annual calendar. What was the subject? Something like FY22 reporting roles, maybe responsibilities. That's enough. Erica. Yes? Whatever you find, read the whole thread, not just the sentence you want. That annoyed me for half a second. Then I understood why she had said it. Evidence worked both ways. Is fair. She didn't ask what I planned to do. I didn't ask her to speak to Mom. Before hanging up, I said, "Please don't call her about this for me." Susan gave a small laugh. I had no intention of volunteering for that assignment. The email took 12 minutes to find. FY22 reporting roles. I was on the original thread. I had forgotten it completely. Teresa's message sat halfway down. If Erica remains our CLP reporting user, should we document whether she is serving as staff, contractor, or volunteer? I'm less concerned about title than clarity of responsibility. Mom's reply came 27 minutes later. Erica helps as family. She has always preferred to stay out of the organizational side. Let's defer formalizing until we settle future leadership. My first reaction was indignation. Then I forced myself to keep reading. Susan had replied, "Fine for now, but we should revisit before the next expansion cycle." Paul had not been copied. Claire had not been copied. There was no conspiracy. No secret board vote. Just an administrative question someone had asked years earlier. And my mother's answer. Erica helps his family. I leaned back. Had I really preferred to stay out of the organizational side? Maybe sometimes. I had never wanted to run the nonprofit. I had my own career. But I had asked more than once whether my work should have a defined scope. I remembered standing in Mom's kitchen after an audit meeting and saying, "If I'm going to keep owning compliance, shouldn't we put that somewhere?" She had waved a dish towel. "Titles come later. Right now we need people who care." At the time, I had been embarrassed for asking. Now I saw the pattern. Whenever authority came up, I was family. Whenever a deadline came up, I was responsible. That distinction was so neat I almost admired it. My phone buzzed. An email from Teresa. Subject: Succession. Planning role confirmation. Because several individuals are named in Saturday's board prep materials, I'm circulating the current draft for role confirmation prior to the anniversary event. Please flag inaccuracies by Thursday. I frowned. Saturday's anniversary event. Mom had mentioned the Foundation's 12-year celebration months ago, but I hadn't thought much about it. I opened the attachment. The first pages were what I expected. Program growth, donor retention, leadership transition. Then I reached the proposed staffing section. Claire Morgan, incoming executive director. Below that, proposed annual salary, $95,000. I stopped. Not because Claire shouldn't be paid. If she became executive director, she absolutely should be. I kept reading. 3 lines lower. Erica Morgan compliance continuity, grants support. Compensation. Family support, no additional cost. I stared at the screen long enough for it to dim. Then I touched the trackpad. Another line appeared beneath it. Erica will provide reporting continuity during Claire's first 12 months in leadership. No contract. No scope. No hours. No start date. No end date beyond the vague 12-month promise. Just my name and the assumption that I would be there. My first impulse was strangely practical. Who had built this budget? What funding source covered Claire's salary? Was the compliance work listed anywhere else? Then the personal meaning caught up. $95,000 for Claire's future. $0 for mine. Not because the work had no value. They had assigned it enough value to build the transition around it. They simply assumed the value belonged to them. I scrolled to the CLP appendix. There it was. Continuation report. Final review and submission Erica. The same work sitting untouched in my portal. The same report Mom had called family help. The same responsibility she had expected me to absorb 9 days before the deadline. Mark came home while I was still sitting there. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door and found me upstairs. "You've been in that chair since this morning." "Mostly." He looked at the screen but didn't lean over me. "What did you find?" I turned the laptop toward him. His eyes moved first to Claire's salary, then to my line. He read it aloud. Family support, no additional cost. Apparently, I'm very affordable. He didn't laugh. That made me laugh instead. One short, ugly sound. Mark pulled the other chair over. "Did you agree to any of this?" "No." "Did they ask?" "No." "What are you going to do?" It was a simple question. Not what should we do. Not, do you want me to call someone? What are you going to do? I looked again at the succession plan. At Claire's name with a title. At mine with an obligation. At the future my mother had apparently designed after spending my wedding, explaining why Claire was the one qualified to lead it. Something had changed since the night before. Not in them. In me. Yesterday, refusing to press, submit had felt like anger. Today, it felt like procedure. "I'm stepping out," I said. "Of the report?" "Of all unpaid foundation work. For now." Mark nodded once. The guilt came immediately. What about the staff? What about the programs? What if CLP delayed funding? What if Claire really wasn't ready? The questions lined up like people outside a locked door. For years, I had opened it automatically. This time, I opened a new email instead. To Diane and Teresa, I wrote that my transition checklist was attached, and that, effective immediately, I would not perform additional reporting or compliance work without a defined, written role, scope, and authority. I added that I was available to answer factual questions necessary for reassignment before the deadline. That was all. No wedding. No accusation. No mention of Claire's salary. Not yet. My finger paused over send. There are moments when changing your life does not feel brave. It feels rude. I sent it anyway. Then I closed the succession packet and looked across the desk at the copy of Mom's wedding add-on, still folded beside my notebook. 3 weeks before my wedding, she had written a 12-minute celebration for Claire into my reception without asking. Now she had written 12 months of my labor into Claire's future the same way. That was when the wedding stopped looking like an isolated humiliation. It was the same habit: build the plan, put Erica in the supporting role, assume she'll comply once everyone is counting on her. The only difference this time was that the plan had reached me before I stepped onto the stage. And for the first time, I had answered before anyone could tell me it was too late to say no. By Thursday morning, the deadline had become a number in the corner of my screen. 6 days. That was how much time Morgan Literacy Initiative had left to get the continuation package through the Commonwealth Literacy Partnership portal. Normally, 6 days would have felt generous. I could review a grant package in 2 evenings if the underlying work was clean, 3 if the budget needed attention, 4 if someone had waited until the last minute and uploaded 5 different versions of the same spreadsheet with file names like Final, Final 2, and used this one. This time, I did not open the package. Instead, I opened Teresa Bell's email. "We have initiated a reporting user reassignment request with CLP," she wrote. "Erica, please provide a status note distinguishing materials you have already reviewed from materials that remain pending. Diane, please identify the staff member who will assume reporting responsibility. Professional, neutral, useful." Underneath, Mom had replied, 7 minutes later. "Erica already knows the report better than anyone. Reassigning access this close to deadline creates unnecessary risk." I could hear her voice in every word. Not angry. Reasonable. Concerned about the mission. That was Mom at her strongest. She rarely needed to order anyone around when she could make disagreements sound irresponsible. My phone rang before I finished reading. Her name filled the screen. For a few seconds, I watched it vibrate against my desk. Then I answered. "Hi, Mom. Can we stop doing this by email?" "No." There was a pause. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I want the reporting issue documented. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're turning something simple into a procedure." "It is a procedure. It has never been a problem before, because I always did it. And now you're refusing because of what happened at the wedding." "No. What happened at the wedding is why I stopped assuming everything you ask me to do is harmless." Her breathing changed, just slightly. "Erica, there are staff depending on that funding." "I know. There are programs depending on it." "I know. You know exactly what happens if the next payment is delayed." That one landed where she intended. Morgan Literacy Initiative. Employed people I knew. Some had been there for years. Tutors, program coordinators, a part-time data specialist. The children in those programs had nothing to do with Diane Morgan or Claire or a slideshow at my wedding. For years, that had been the easiest door into me. The mission needs you. Not Mom, not Claire. The mission. My fingers tightened around the phone. That's why I gave Teresa the transition checklist. You could prevent all of this by doing what you've always done. I haven't reviewed the current package. You know how to review it. That's not the same thing. What does that even mean? It means knowing how to do a job doesn't make me responsible for doing it. Mom exhaled. "Please, submit this one report. We'll fix everything afterward." There it was. The sentence that had built almost a decade of my life. Just this one. Just this deadline. Just until Claire gets settled. Just until the audit is over. Just until we figure out the structure. I looked at the calendar hanging beside my desk. 6 days. I'm not submitting a report I haven't reviewed under a role I haven't agreed to hold. You're making a point. No, I'm setting a limit. That's the same thing when other people pay for it. The line stung because part of me agreed with her. That frightened me. I have to work. Of course you do. The way she said it made my career sound like an inconvenient hobby. Then she hung up. For several minutes, nothing moved, except the cursor on my screen. The guilt came first. Then the old instinct to open the portal anyway. I could have done it quietly. No one would have stopped me. Review the package. Fix the weak sections. Submit it. Save the staff from uncertainty. Save Claire from a rough transition. Save Mom from having to explain anything to Teresa. The whole system was built around the fact that I knew how to rescue it. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet. Not the foundations. Mine. Across the top, I created 5 columns. Task. Document. Prepared by. Approved by. Actual authority. It was the kind of thing I did at work whenever people used vague language like, "We handle that," or "The team owns it." A team cannot own responsibility. A person does. A role does. A defined process does. So I started with CLP. Program data prepared by staff. Budget approved by Diane. Narrative drafted by program leadership. Compliance review historically performed by me. Portal submission historically performed by me. Formal employment authority for Erica Morgan. None. Consulting agreement. None. Volunteer role description. None. Board appointment. None. I stared at the empty cells. Then I added the email from 2021. Teresa asking whether I should be documented as staff, contractor, or volunteer. Mom replying that I helped as family. The sentence looked different in the spreadsheet. At the time, I had heard affection in it. Now it looked like a loophole. The foundation could depend on my work while avoiding the inconvenience of defining my authority. I kept going. Annual reporting. Audit preparation. Grant calendars. Corrective action response. Every row told the same story. Responsibilities accumulated. Authority did not. By lunchtime, the page looked less like an argument and more like a map. And maps are dangerous when you have spent years pretending you are lost. My personal calendar was open on the second monitor. Every Wednesday evening from 6:30 to 8:30, there was a recurring block. MLI reporting. Grants. It had been there so long I barely saw it anymore. I clicked it. Delete recurring event? My hand paused. That little blue rectangle had survived birthdays, vacations, date nights, work, travel, and 2 apartment moves. Deleting it felt absurdly serious. Then I clicked delete all. Wednesday night went blank. The empty space bothered me instantly. I almost put something else there. Instead, I stood up. On the shelf behind my desk sat a gray storage box full of old foundation folders, reporting calendars, grant notes, audit checklists, printouts. Mom had asked me to review over dinner. I carried the box downstairs and put it in the hall closet. Not the trash. Not destroyed. Archived. That distinction mattered to me. When Mark came home that evening, he found me cooking pasta. Actually cooking. Not balancing a laptop beside the stove while answering emails. He set his bag down. This feels suspicious. What does? You're using the kitchen for food. I've heard that's traditional. He smiled. We ate at the table. Halfway through dinner, I realized my phone had been face down for almost 20 minutes. Nothing terrible had happened. No organization had collapsed. No child had lost access to a book because Erica Morgan had eaten pasta while it was hot. After dinner, I opened my work email. A message from my director had been sitting there since Monday. Months earlier, our department had discussed creating a cross-team compliance initiative for the fall. Usually, I would have read the expected time commitment and immediately calculated whether it collided with Morgan literacy deadlines. This time, I read it differently. Would you be interested in leading the initial working group? My cursor rested over reply. 3 years earlier, I had turned down a leadership rotation because Mom said they could not do year-end without me. The memory still made my stomach tighten. Maybe this opportunity was smaller. Maybe it would lead nowhere. That wasn't the point. I typed, "Yes, I'd like to be considered." Then I sent it before I could make room for everyone else first. The next evening, Dad showed up at our townhouse. He had texted first, which I appreciated. Mark was still at work. Dad stood on the porch holding a paper bag from the bakery near his office. You brought carbohydrates as diplomatic protection? He glanced at the bag. Your mother said not to come. That makes the pastry more interesting. He almost smiled. We sat at the kitchen table. For several minutes, he talked around the actual subject. The wedding had been emotional. Mom had overplanned. Claire had been put in an awkward position. Everybody was under pressure because of the foundation transition. Finally, I said, Dad, why are you here? He folded his hands. Your mother thinks you're trying to punish her. I'm not. She doesn't believe that. That isn't something I can fix. His eyes dropped to the table. She built that organization because she spent years watching other people take credit for her work. That was new enough to make me stop. What are you talking about? Dad rubbed one thumb over the other. Before she started Morgan Literacy, she worked for a reading initiative over in Chesterfield. You remember that? Barely. You girls were in college. I remembered Mom going to evening events, boxes of pamphlets in the trunk of her car, complaining about a director named Marilyn or Miriam. Dad continued. Your mother wrote grants, built partnerships, did the reports. When the program got a major award, the director went on stage and talked about her vision. Your mother's name was in the booklet once. I said nothing. She came home furious. How do you know all this? I was there. That was enough. He was not telling me what Mom had secretly thought. He was telling me what he had personally witnessed. She said something that night, Dad continued. If I ever build something of my own, nobody is going to erase my family from it. The sentence settled between us. For the first time, some of Mom's behavior formed a line I could follow. The obsession with photographs. The public praise. The phrase, Morgan, legacy. Claire on stage. A family name attached to the nonprofit. Understanding it made me feel something I had not expected. Sadness. Not forgiveness. Not even softness. Just the sadness of seeing how neatly people can reproduce what hurt them. She hated being invisible, I said. Dad nodded. And somehow she decided the solution was to make me invisible. That's not what she thinks she's doing. I didn't say it was. He looked at me. Can you give her a little grace? The question would have worked on me a month earlier. Maybe even a week earlier. Understanding where she learned something doesn't make me available for it. Dad's face tightened. I'm not asking you to be available for anything. You came here because she wants me to submit the report. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Before he left, Dad pushed the bakery bag toward me. You always liked the almond ones. I still do. That was the strange thing. He could remember which pastry I liked. He could also spend years watching the same daughter work behind the scenes and call it details. People were rarely consistent enough to make anger simple. The next morning, Claire texted, Can I come by after work? Just me. I almost said no. Then I wrote, 7 is fine. She arrived wearing black trousers, a cream blouse, and the exhausted expression of someone who had been answering questions all day. No cap and gown. No spotlight. Just my twin sister. Mark took one look at us and said he was going upstairs to finish a proposal. He didn't need to be asked. Claire stayed standing near the kitchen island. Mom says you're refusing to submit the CLP report to make her admit she was wrong about the wedding. She said that? Yes. I'm refusing to submit because I haven't reviewed it and I'm not formally responsible for it. She says you've always done it. That's true. So why now? The question irritated me. Then I realized she was asking it seriously. Because I finally asked why always was supposed to mean forever. Claire looked away. I asked Mom about the succession plan. That caught my attention. What did she say? That it was a working draft. It is. She said you knew you'd be staying through my first year. I didn't. Claire looked back at me. Not at all? No. Her mouth tightened. I assumed you would. There it was. Not cruelty. Not conspiracy. Something more ordinary. You assumed. You always do. The words hung in the kitchen. Claire heard them too. I could tell because her expression changed. That came out wrong. No, it came out accurately. Erica, you assumed I would give up a year of evenings because I always have. I didn't mean unpaid. Did you ask? She didn't answer. That hurt more than if she had defended Mom. Because Claire was not stupid. She had an MPA. She understood budgets, staffing, organizations. She simply had never been required to ask what my labor cost. After a moment, she said, "Could you stay 6 months?" I laughed once, not because it was funny. "You came here to ask me to do exactly what I'm refusing to do." "I'm asking because I don't know everything you know." "That's not a character flaw. I'm supposed to take over an organization in a few weeks. Then you should know whether the job can function without your sister working for free." Her shoulders dropped. "So what am I supposed to do?" For years, that question would have activated something in me. A plan, a checklist, a rescue. This time, I left it where she put it. "I don't know." "You do know." "I know what I would do." "That doesn't make it my job to prepare you." Claire stared at me. The kitchen clock clicked loudly enough to notice. Finally, I asked, "Did you know Mom budgeted me into your first year?" "No." "Did you know she listed me as compliance continuity?" "No." "Did you know I'm the reporting user they were still expecting to submit the continuation package?" "I knew you handled CLP. I didn't know no one else had been assigned." That distinction sounded believable. It also didn't absolve her. "You knew I handled more than people said." She looked at the floor. Yes. That was the first honest sentence either of us had spoken all evening. Before leaving, Claire said, "I'm going to ask Mom for the full succession budget." I didn't tell her what she would find. If she wanted the chair, she needed to look underneath it herself. 2 days later, Mom invited me to lunch. Not summoned. Invited. The restaurant was one she used for donor meetings, quiet enough for private conversations, and expensive enough that everyone behaved themselves. She was already seated when I arrived. No Paul. No Claire. A folder rested beside her water glass. For the first 10 minutes, she did something almost more unsettling than anger. She listened. Then she said, "I should have handled your wedding differently." Not "I was wrong." Not "I'm sorry I humiliated you." But close enough that the old part of me leaned forward. She continued, "I was excited about Claire's degree and what it means for the foundation." I lost perspective. I waited. Then Mom looked directly at me. "And I should have said this years ago. None of what I built would exist without you." There it was. The sentence. Not exactly the one I had imagined for almost a decade. Better. For one dangerous second, I felt 30 years younger. The daughter at the table who had finally done enough. Mom touched the folder. "I want to fix the structure." She slid it toward me. Inside was a proposed 12-month agreement. Director of Grants and Compliance. Defined scope. Compensation. Participation in management meetings. A public bio on the foundation website. Even language about reviewing workload against my full-time employment before finalizing hours. It was not insulting. That was what made it dangerous. "This is what you wanted," Mom said. "A defined role?" Recognition. My throat tightened. She knew. Maybe she had always known. "What's the condition?" Her expression changed by less than an inch. "There isn't a condition." "Then I can take this home and consider it after Teresa finishes reviewing the succession structure." Mom folded her napkin. "We need the CLP report first." "Of course. I'm not the current report owner. You could be for one more week." "I haven't reviewed it." "You know how." I closed the folder. "Anything else?" She leaned toward me. "Submit the continuation package. Stay through Claire's first year. Let the board treat the earlier draft as what it was, an internal working document. We stopped turning every mistake into a formal correction." There it was. The price. Not money. Silence. Mom was offering me the title I had once begged her to define, but only if I helped preserve the story that the old arrangement had been harmless. "Why now?" I asked. "Because now you're forcing everyone to put things in writing." She sounded frustrated. Not guilty. That made the answer more believable. For years, writing things down had been unnecessary because I always complied. My refusal had created the need for a contract. I ran my thumb along the edge of the folder. A 12-month title. Paid work. Public acknowledgement. The mission still mattered to me. With actual authority, I could build a proper process. Hire support. Separate reporting from family favors. For several minutes, I could see the version of the future where I said yes. That frightened me more than saying no. I'll read it, I said. Mom relaxed. But I'm not submitting the CLP report. Her face closed again. Then you're not negotiating in good faith. No. I'm refusing to make this offer retroactively justify the old arrangement. You always have to make things so clinical. It's my job. Your job is not your whole personality. No, but it taught me something useful. What? If someone only defines your role after you refuse to keep doing it for free, you should read the conditions very carefully. I took the folder with me. Not because I intended to sign it, because I wanted to see exactly what recognition cost in writing. That night, Mark and I sat at the dining room table with the old succession packet open on one side and Mom's new offer on the other. He read quietly. Then he looked at the budget page. Claire Morgan, incoming executive director. $95,000 a year. Erica Morgan, compliance continuity, family support. No additional cost. The words looked uglier every time I saw them. Mark tapped the new agreement. If this came from any organization you weren't related to, what would you call a clause that gives you the title only if you agree not to challenge the first version? I didn't answer immediately. Because I knew. Leverage. He nodded. That was all. No speech. No instruction. Just the question I should have asked myself years earlier. My phone was beside the old budget page. I photographed that single page. Nothing else. No private board correspondence. No dramatic accusation. Then I sent it to Claire. A minute passed. Then 2. Her reply came. Was this always the plan? I looked at Mom's new contract. At the old 0. At my own name sitting between them. My answer contained 2 words. Ask Mom. Then I opened an email to Diane and Teresa. I declined the proposed role. I confirmed that I would not submit the current CLP package. I reiterated that any future use of my name required a written scope, defined authority, and my agreement before the role appeared in organizational materials. Then I sent it. The guilt returned. So did grief. But neither of them changed the answer. Across the room, my phone lit again. This time it was not Claire. It was an event reminder that had been sitting on my calendar for months. Morgan Literacy Initiative, 12th Anniversary Celebration. Saturday evening. Underneath was the event theme. The Morgan Legacy Next Generation. I read it twice. At my wedding, Mom had built a stage before asking whether I would step aside. Now she had built another one. The difference was that this time, I already knew what role she had written for me. And before I walked into that room, I had already said no. By Friday afternoon, the Commonwealth Literacy Partnership report had stopped belonging to me. That sentence looked strange even in my own head. For years, CLP had been one of those things everyone associated with my name automatically. If there was a deadline, someone forwarded it to me. If there was a portal problem, someone texted me. If the numbers looked wrong, my phone rang. Now Teresa had copied me on an email confirming that Morgan Literacy Initiative had requested a new reporting user. The new account would belong to Nathan Ellis, the operations manager. I knew Nathan. Competent. Organized. Not a grant specialist, but he knew the programs and could learn the portal. The reassignment would take a few business days. CLP had also approved a short extension while the access change was processed. No disaster. No collapsed foundation. No vanished grant. Just a delay, some uncomfortable administrative work, and a consultant Teresa had authorized to review the package before submission. Mom had spent years making me feel as though stepping away would leave a crater. It turned out the crater had a name. It was called planning. Teresa's email ended with one sentence. Erica, thank you for providing the transition index and identifying the sections not yet reviewed. That was all. No praise. No apology. No declaration that I had been right. I appreciated it. The organization had a path forward because I had handed over what I knew, without pretending I owed them my continued labor. My laptop was open on the dining room table when another message arrived. This one came from Diane. The consultant alone will cost us several $1,000s. This is money that could have gone to programming. No greeting. No question. Just the bill. I stared at the message. 3 weeks earlier, Mom had spent money adding a 12-minute graduation presentation to my wedding without asking me. Now paying a professional to do professional work was suddenly wasteful. For once, I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the correction document I had drafted the night before. 3 short paragraphs. No emotional language. No wedding. No accusation. I stated that I had not accepted any role in the proposed succession structure. I stated that I would not serve as unpaid compliance continuity during Claire's transition. I stated that any future use of my name in a staff, consultant, volunteer, or advisory role required written consent from me before publication or board consideration. Then I added one practical sentence confirming that the historical files, status notes, and portal transition materials had already been delivered. I attached it to an email addressed to Teresa, Susan, and Mom. My finger paused over send. Not because I doubted what I wanted, because putting a boundary in writing removes one of the easiest escape routes. You cannot later pretend you were just upset. You cannot tell yourself you never really meant it. Once sent, the sentence belongs to the record. I clicked. Susan replied first. Received for Treasurer Records. Teresa answered 15 minutes later. Understood. Any succession structure will require formal board approval and clearly defined responsibilities. Mom did not reply. The absence of a response used to make me nervous. I would replay my wording, looking for some hidden offense. That afternoon, I closed the laptop and went back to my actual job. The cross-team compliance initiative I had agreed to lead was holding its first planning call. 6 people from different departments appeared on my screen. No one called me selfish for asking who owned a task. No one called written responsibility too formal. We spent 40 minutes assigning roles. When someone said, "Maybe Erica can just handle the final review," my colleague Priya laughed. "Ask her first." A ridiculous warmth spread through me. Not because the comment was profound, because she had said it as if asking were ordinary, as if competence did not erase consent. When the meeting ended, a calendar invitation appeared for the next month. For once, my first thought was not whether it conflicted with Morgan literacy. That evening, I turned off foundation email notifications on my phone. I left the account accessible. I simply removed the sound. No buzz during dinner. No banner while I was brushing my teeth. No little red number insisting that someone else's urgency belonged in my body. Saturday morning, Claire called. Not texted. Called. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then answered. "Hi. Can I ask you something without you assuming Mom sent me?" "You can ask." There was a short pause. I got the full succession budget. That pulled my attention away from the coffee mug in my hand. "And?" She sent it after I asked twice. I waited. Claire continued. "I thought the page you sent me might have been an early draft." "It was an early draft. It's still the same structure in the later version." Her voice sounded flatter than usual. "How much of the compliance work did she expect you to do?" "I don't know. There was no scope." "No, I mean realistically." "That depends on the grant cycle." "Erica." I walked to the kitchen window. Outside, a neighbor was dragging a hose across his lawn. There was something almost absurd about discussing years of resentment while someone watered hydrangeas 10 feet away. Realistically? Enough that putting family support beside it was convenient. Claire exhaled. "I asked Mom why your line was 0. "What did she say?" "That you already have a career." There, it was again. "What else?" "She said the position was temporary continuity, and that you never cared about titles." I laughed softly. "That part is impressive." "What?" "I've been asking for role clarity for years." Claire didn't answer. After a few seconds, she said, "If you leave completely, can I actually do this job?" That was the first question she had asked that felt more important than whether I was angry. I thought about how much I could tell her without becoming her transition plan. The version Mom announced? Not alone. "So I'm not qualified." I didn't say that. It sounded like it. "You know programs. You know donors. You know community outreach. You have the degree everyone keeps talking about. Then what am I missing?" An actual compliance structure. Staff ownership. Reporting support. A transition period that doesn't depend on me working nights for free. Claire was quiet. "That's a lot." "Yes. Why didn't you ever tell me?" The question irritated me enough that I had to count to 3 before answering. "I did tell you I was tired. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. I watched a drop of condensation slide down my glass. I told you I couldn't keep doing year-end reports after work. I told you I used vacation days. I told you Mom needed to hire someone. Claire said nothing. You heard those things, I continued, and still assumed I'd stay. I thought you liked being the one who knew everything. That hurt because there had been truth in it once. Being needed had made me feel important. But liking competence was not the same as consenting to exploitation. I liked knowing I could solve problems. Okay. I didn't like being assigned every problem because I could. Claire took a breath. Then she said, I'm not signing the employment agreement yet. I turned from the window. That's your decision. I know. Good. She needed to hear herself say that. I asked Teresa whether the board has formally approved the succession structure. What did she say? She said they've discussed transition planning, but there hasn't been a final approval of the employment structure. That mattered. I knew only what Claire had just told me, so I kept the conclusion narrow. Mom had been speaking publicly about Claire's future, as though the final shape already existed. It didn't. Are you still going tonight? Claire asked. The anniversary celebration. Yes. Why? Because part of me wanted to see what Mom would say. Because another part was tired of leaving rooms, so she could explain me after I was gone. Mostly because my name was still printed in the program as a family advisor, despite the correction I had filed the day before. I'm going because if anyone describes my role inaccurately in front of me, I want to be the person who corrects it. Claire's answer came quietly. Fair. Mark asked the same question an hour later while I was getting dressed. You sure you want to go? He was sitting on the edge of the bed, tying his shoes. No. He looked up. That's not the answer I expected. I'm not sure. I'm still going. Why? Because not going would make tonight easier for Mom. That a good enough reason? No. I fastened an earring. The better reason is that I'm done disappearing whenever telling the truth might make someone uncomfortable. Mark nodded. What do you want from me tonight? The question felt familiar now. Stay with me. Don't speak for me. Easy. And if I decide to leave, we leave. Done. That was it. No strategy session. No heroic promise. Just terms I had chosen. The anniversary celebration was held at a restored brick event space near the river. I knew the room before I walked through the doors. Not literally, but I knew the arrangement. Podium. Projection screen. Round tables. Soft lighting. A photograph wall featuring 12 years of program milestones. And at the front of the room, a title slide. The Morgan Legacy. Next Generation. My stomach tightened. For half a second, I was back at the wedding. White roses. Claire's graduation portrait. Mom telling me to step aside. Then Mark touched 2 fingers lightly against my elbow. Not guiding me. Just there. I'm okay, I said. Susan was seated near the front. Teresa stood talking with 2 board members. Claire arrived 10 minutes later. She wore a dark green dress and carried a slim folder under one arm. Our eyes met. She gave me a small nod. Mom saw me after that. Her expression did not change. She crossed the room, greeted Mark, and kissed my cheek. I'm glad you came. Thank you. Tonight matters. I know. Her gaze rested on me for another moment. Then she walked away. That was all. No warning. No private request. For most of dinner, the event was ordinary. Staff talked about reading programs. A former student spoke about getting into college. Donors were thanked. Photos appeared on the screen. Mom was good at this. That had never been the problem. She could make a mission feel tangible. She could make people care. When she finally walked to the podium, the room quieted naturally. 12 years ago, she began. Morgan Literacy Initiative started with 4 volunteers, 3 folding tables, and more optimism than money. People laughed. She told stories I had heard before. The first book drive. The first school partnership. The first major grant. Then her tone shifted. Organizations survive because people sacrifice for them. I felt my shoulders tense. Mom continued. The strongest people give the most. There it was. Applause moved through the room. Not because anyone knew what the sentence meant inside our house. To everyone else, it sounded noble. Mom smiled toward Claire. This year, My daughter completed her Master of Public Administration, giving our organization one more piece of what it needs for the next generation. Claire stood when Mom gestured to her. The screen changed. Claire Morgan. Next generation leadership. People clapped. I did too. Claire had earned her degree. That part was true. Then Mom looked toward my table. And Erica has agreed to stay beside her sister and ensure continuity in grants and compliance during this transition. Something inside me became very calm. Mark did not move. Susan looked at me. Teresa's head turned slightly. Mom kept smiling. For years, she had relied on a simple principle. Say the expectation as though the decision had already been made. Let the audience turn it into obligation. It had worked at dinners, at holidays, at work days, at my wedding. Not this time. No, I said. My voice was not loud. The room was quiet enough that it carried anyway. Mom stopped. A few people turned in their chairs. She gave a small laugh. Erica, we discussed this. You offered me a position. My hands were steady in my lap. I did not accept it. The atmosphere changed. Not dramatically. No gasps. Just the subtle discomfort of people realizing they had been asked to applaud something that might not be true. Teresa spoke from her table. Erica, are you saying the program description is inaccurate? Yes. Mom's smile disappeared. This is not the place. I looked at Teresa, not Mom. The original succession draft listed me for 12 months of compliance continuity before anyone asked whether I agreed. No one spoke. The current CLP reporting cycle also remained dependent on my individual reporting user access, even though I had no formal employment or consulting role. Mom opened her mouth. I continued before she could redirect it. That access has now been transitioned. Historical files and status notes have been handed over. 3 facts. That was enough. And yesterday, I said, I submitted written confirmation that I will not serve as unpaid continuity, and that my name cannot be used for future roles without my consent. Teresa nodded once. I received that. The sentence changed the room more than anything I had said. Not because Teresa chose me, because the matter was no longer just a daughter contradicting her mother. A record existed. Mom looked at me. You could have handled this privately. I did. Her jaw tightened. You turned down a paid position. Yes. You refused to help with one report. I refused to submit work I hadn't reviewed under a role I hadn't agreed to hold. This is exactly what I mean. Her voice rose slightly. You already have a career. You don't need to be paid for every little thing you do for your own family. The sentence landed hard. Not on me. On the room. A few people looked down. Someone shifted a chair. I thought of the budget page. Claire, $95,000. Erica, family support, 0. Mom had spent years making that logic sound like love. Now, in a room full of professionals, it sounded different. Claire stepped forward. Was Erica always supposed to stay unpaid? Mom turned toward her. This isn't about money. Then why was my salary in the budget and hers listed as 0? My chest tightened. Claire had brought the budget with her. Mom looked toward Teresa. Those were preliminary numbers. Claire held the folder against her side. So, was she supposed to stay or not? Claire, you are building your future. Mom's voice softened. Your sister is already established. There it was. The whole system in one sentence. Claire needed investment because her future mattered. I needed nothing because I had survived without it. For the first time, I watched my sister receive the logic directly, instead of benefiting from it at a distance. Her face changed. Not into outrage. Into recognition. She turned to Teresa. Has the board approved my employment structure? Teresa answered carefully. No final succession structure has been approved. Claire looked down at the folder in her hand, then back at Mom. I'm not accepting it like this. Mom stared at her. What does that mean? It means I'm not signing the agreement until the job exists without Erica being assigned to support me. Claire. No. My sister's voice shook slightly, but she kept going. If I'm qualified, then build the role properly. If I'm not, don't give it to me because you assumed Erica would hold the hard parts underneath. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Not because Claire had saved me. She hadn't. My correction existed before she stood up. The portal was already transferred. My unpaid work had already stopped. Even if Claire had signed the contract in front of me, I was still out. What she had done was different. She had refused to stand where Mom placed her. The pattern needed two daughters. One in the light, one underneath it. For the first time, neither of us was cooperating. Mom gripped the sides of the podium. This celebration is not the place for this conversation. Teresa stood. I agree. Everyone looked at her. We're not going to resolve succession tonight. The board will review the structure formally. Mom's face went rigid. Teresa did not accuse her of anything. She did not remove her from office. She did not hand me a victory. She simply took the decision out of the speech. The event continued after that, though not smoothly. Another staff member presented program outcomes. A donor spoke. Dessert was served. No one applauded when Claire sat down. No one applauded me either. I was grateful. This wasn't a trial. It was a room where something had stopped working. By the time Mark and I reached the hallway near the exit, Mom caught up with us. Dad was behind her. Claire had stayed inside. You ruined 12 years in 5 minutes, Mom said. Her voice was low. My first instinct was to defend myself. List the deadlines, the emails, the unpaid hours, the wedding. Instead, I said, I corrected one sentence. Her eyes narrowed. You embarrassed me in front of people who trust me. You told them I agreed to something I had already declined. You could have spoken to me afterward. I did speak to you before. That correction didn't need to become public. Then my role shouldn't have become public. Dad stepped between us slightly. Enough. I looked at him. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Your mother feels like she lost both daughters tonight. The sentence was so familiar in structure that I almost missed what was wrong with it. Mom loses. Therefore, Erica repairs. I shook my head. She didn't lose us tonight. Dad lowered his hand. She noticed tonight. Mom flinched. Maybe at the words. Maybe at my tone. I couldn't know. I did know I was done standing there. Good night. Mom called my name. I kept walking. Mark pushed open the exterior door. Cool evening air hit my face. For the first time all night, my lungs felt full. We reached the car before he spoke. You okay? No. He waited. But I think I'm done explaining. That sounds expensive. I laughed. It already cost 12 years. The next morning, sunlight woke me before my phone did. For a few seconds, the night before felt distant. Then I saw the email notification. From Teresa. Subject. Succession process. I opened it. The message was only 4 lines. The board will suspend the current succession announcement pending formal governance review. Existing leadership remains in place while roles, compensation, and reporting responsibilities are evaluated. No successor appointment has been finalized. Erica, your written correction will remain with the governance record. I read it once. Then again. Mom still had the organization. Claire still had her degree. I had not won a throne. That was never what I wanted. What had changed was simpler. For the first time in 9 years, Morgan Literacy Initiative had to plan its future without assuming my answer was yes. The first real test came 3 days after Teresa's email. Not at the anniversary. Not in front of donors. On a Tuesday morning, while I was standing in line for coffee before work, my phone buzzed with a message from Teresa. Would you consider a paid 90-day transition engagement? Defined scope, no management responsibility. Historical files and reporting questions only. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. 6 months earlier, that offer would have felt like victory. Paid. Defined. Professional. Everything I had spent years asking for. The barista called my name. I stepped aside with my coffee and read Teresa's message again. There was nothing insulting about it. That was what made the decision harder. Morgan Literacy Initiative still mattered to me. The programs mattered. The staff mattered. I knew where things were buried, which old grant files had been renamed twice, which reporting assumptions had become institutional habits. 90 days would have been useful. It also would have been familiar. A clean contract could solve the compensation problem without solving the deeper one. I opened my email. Thank you for offering a defined engagement. I can answer factual questions about historical files in writing, but I'm not available to return to operations. My thumb paused. Then I sent it. The old guilt arrived on schedule. It always did. But guilt had lost something. Authority. A week later, Teresa copied me on a short update, confirming that Nathan's CLP access had been activated. The outside consultant completed the compliance review, and the continuation report went in under the new reporting structure after a brief extension. The next disbursement was delayed by several days. Nothing collapsed. Nobody lost a job overnight. No child was turned away from a reading program because I had refused to press a button. The foundation used a small portion of its operating reserve, while the payment cleared and paid the consultant for the work I had once been expected to absorb. Mom never said anything to me about that bill again. That bothered me less than I expected. For years, I had imagined that stepping away would force some dramatic reckoning. Instead, what happened was quieter. Professional work cost money. Planning took time. Other people could learn. The world kept moving. That realization was almost offensive in its simplicity. I had spent years being told I was indispensable. What they had actually meant was convenient. The first phone call from Mom came nearly a month after the anniversary. I answered because I wanted to know whether we could speak without the foundation entering the room before either of us did. "Hi," I said. "Hi." Her voice was careful. For a few seconds, we talked about nothing. A cousin's birthday, a restaurant Dad liked, a neighbor from my childhood moving to Florida. Then Mom said, "The board is interviewing people." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not even 5 minutes. For what? Executive director. You knew they would. I didn't think they'd move this quickly. I had learned from Teresa's board update that the succession review had expanded into a broader leadership transition. Diane remained executive director while the process continued, but the board had decided to recruit externally rather than treat Claire as the automatic successor. Mom continued. "They're turning my organization into something I barely recognize." I looked out the window of my office. A delivery truck was backing into the loading area across the street. "You built it to serve people." "I built it with my name on it." There was more honesty in that sentence than in most of the speeches I had heard her give. "Those aren't the same thing." She exhaled. "I don't expect you to understand." That almost made me laugh. "I think I understand more than I used to." "Then you understand why this hurts." "I do." The answer came easily. Mom went quiet. Understanding her did not require volunteering to reverse the consequences. Several months later, Teresa sent the formal announcement. Morgan Literacy Initiative had hired an external executive director with experience in literacy programming and nonprofit operations. Diane would transition over the following quarter into a founder emeritus role focused on community relationships and major events. No operational control. No succession appointment. No Morgan daughter inheriting the chair. The nonprofit still carried our last name, but the future no longer automatically belonged to us. Mom called 2 days after the announcement. "They made me a mascot." "I don't think that's what founder emeritus means. It means they want my contacts and not my decisions." I did not know enough about the board's private reasoning to tell her whether that was true. So I stayed with what I knew. "You still get to be part of what you built." "That's easy for you to say." You walked away. There were a dozen responses available, some sharp, some deserved. "Instead," I said, "I walked away from a role I never agreed to hold." Mom was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "I miss how things used to be." That one hurt. Because I did too. Not all of it, but parts. Sunday dinners, before every conversation became a request. Mom dropping off soup when I had the flu. Dad teaching Claire and me to change a tire. Claire and me laughing so hard during college breaks that Mom would yell up the stairs for us to go to sleep. The problem with leaving a bad arrangement is that you do not get to remove only the bad parts. You lose familiar things too. "I miss some of it," I said. "Then why are you doing this?" The question told me we were still not talking about the same loss. "I'm not going back to the version where missing you means working for you." She ended the call soon after. No apology. No reconciliation. For the first time, that felt more honest than forcing one. Dad took longer to understand the new rules. He called every few weeks with what he described as updates. "Your mother is exhausted. Your mother thinks Claire abandoned her. Your mother doesn't understand why you won't come by the office." Eventually, I stopped him in the middle of one. Dad, if Mom wants to tell me something, she can call me. I'm just trying to keep the peace. You've been keeping the arrangement. That's not fair. Maybe not. But I don't want foundation updates through you anymore. He hid. So what am I supposed to talk to you about? The question made me sadder than I wanted to admit. Me. He went quiet. I continued. Ask about work. Ask about Mark. Tell me what you're doing. We can have a relationship that isn't about me fixing something for Mom. It was awkward after that. For a while, our calls got shorter. Then one Saturday he phoned and spent 15 minutes telling me about a tomato plant he had nearly killed. No message from Mom. No request. No guilt. It was not healing. It was practice. Claire was harder. We did not speak for almost 3 weeks after the anniversary. Then she texted, "Coffee? No, Mom. No foundation." I almost smiled. We met at a place halfway between our houses. She arrived before me and had already ordered. For the first 10 minutes, we discussed weather with the concentration of diplomats negotiating a ceasefire. Eventually, Claire put both hands around her mug. I turned down the internal executive director process. I heard they opened an external search. Teresa told me after I withdrew. That was how I knew. Not because I had been sitting inside board meetings. Claire continued. I applied for a program manager position somewhere else. Good. She gave me a look. That sounded like you were grading me. Sorry. You're not. I know. She looked down. I got an interview. Congratulations. Thank you. Another pause. Then she said, "There's something I owe you." My shoulders tightened automatically. Not hope. Preparation. Claire looked directly at me. I knew you did more than they said. The coffee shop noise seemed to pull farther away. I didn't know the full reporting structure, she continued. I didn't know about the $0 line until you sent it, but I knew you were doing a lot. I said nothing. She rubbed one thumb against the cardboard sleeve around her cup. I didn't ask how much because the answer might have changed what I was willing to accept. There was no excuse attached. No, but Mom told me. No, I was under pressure. Just the sentence. It hurt. It also gave me something I had not received from her before. A fact I could use. Not evidence for a file. Evidence for a relationship. You benefited from not asking, I said. Yes. And when I said I was tired, you heard that as me being capable. Yes. Why? Her mouth tightened. I think because everyone did. That explains it. I know. It doesn't erase it. I know that too. That was enough for one morning. We did not hug dramatically in the parking lot. We did not decide childhood had been misunderstood. We made one small agreement instead. Coffee, once a month. No foundation talk for the first 3 meetings. No work favors unless the other person actually asked, and the answer could be no. Claire got the program manager job 6 weeks later. She told me herself. I congratulated her. When she asked whether I wanted to look over her onboarding plan, she stopped halfway through the sentence. Actually, no, never mind. I laughed. You can ask. Would you? No. She rolled her eyes. Okay. And that was progress too. My own life got larger in boring ways. That mattered more than I expected. The cross-team initiative I had agreed to lead became a real part of my work, instead of another line on a development plan I kept postponing. Wednesday evenings stayed empty. The first few months, I kept expecting someone to fill them for me. Eventually, Mark and I started using them for whatever we wanted. Sometimes dinner out. Sometimes groceries. Sometimes nothing. The first time I took a full week of vacation without checking Morgan literacy email. I spent the first 2 days feeling as though I had forgotten something important. By the third, I stopped reaching for my phone every time it buzzed. At the end of that year, my director called me into her office. The title on the paperwork was Director of Grant Compliance. The promotion was not a reward for surviving my mother. Nobody at work knew most of what had happened. It came after years of performance reviews, the cross-team initiative, and work I had finally stopped interrupting for somebody else's emergencies. Still, when the new badge arrived, I held it longer than necessary. Erika Morgan, Director of Grant Compliance. My name, my title, my work. No one had placed me in the role without asking. No one had called it a favor. No one had written 0 beside it because I was supposedly strong enough not to need anything. Mark found me standing in the kitchen looking at the badge. You going to wear it or frame it? Don't tempt me. He opened the refrigerator. Your mother would frame it. That's exactly why I won't. He laughed. I set the badge on the counter. Then my phone buzzed. Mom. For 1 second, the old reflex returned. Answer quickly. Check the tone. Determine what is needed. Instead, I watched the screen until the call ended. No anger. No triumph. I was cooking dinner. That was what I was doing. The phone could wait. A few weeks after our first wedding anniversary, the photographer delivered the final printed album. Mark and I opened it on a Sunday afternoon. There were hundreds of photographs. The ceremony. Our first dance. His mother crying. My shoes abandoned beneath a table. Claire laughing with one of my college friends. Dad holding 2 pieces of cake when he thought no one was looking. Then I reached the photograph I had avoided whenever it appeared in the online gallery. The moment immediately after Claire's slideshow had been stopped. Mom was turned toward the sound booth. Claire stood several feet behind her. Dad's mouth was open as if he was saying something. I was slightly off-center. Not posed. Not smiling. My bouquet hung at my side. Mark was beside me. My hand was wrapped around his. For a year, I had thought of that image as proof that my wedding had been damaged. The bride pushed aside. The wrong daughter centered. The moment everything went wrong. Looking at it now, something else became visible. That was the first time I had said yes when Mark asked whether I wanted something stopped. Not because he decided for me. Because I did. Before the emails. Before the portal. Before the budget. Before I understood how much of my life had been built around assuming my answer would always be yes. Mark leaned over my shoulder. You okay? Yes. I surprised myself. Then I removed the photograph from the album. He looked at me. Throwing it out? No. I found a simple frame in the closet. Nothing ornate. No wedding flowers pressed around it. Just wood and glass. The picture went inside. Upstairs, I placed it on the shelf beside my work badge. The 2 objects did not match. One came from a day when somebody else tried to decide where I stood. The other came from a role I had chosen for myself. Together, they made more sense than either one alone. Mom and I still spoke occasionally. Dad called more often. Claire and I still had coffee. None of those relationships returned to what they had been. That was not a failure. Sometimes, a relationship survives by becoming smaller. Sometimes smaller is what makes it honest. For most of my life, I thought strength meant carrying whatever the people I loved handed me. Their deadlines. Their needs. Their plans. Their version of who I was. It took me 38 years to learn that strength could look like something else. A closed laptop. An unanswered call. A role declined. A name removed from the wrong line and placed, deliberately, on the right one. And a wedding photograph I no longer saw as the moment they pushed me out of the frame. It was the moment I finally began choosing the frame for myself.